I studied anthropology in college. I did my field work on the Navajo reservation. I wrote a thesis on Navajo long-distance runners. And recently, while I was researching PTSD, I had this thought. I thought back to the work that I did when I was young, and I thought, I bet the Navajo, the Apache, the Comanche, I mean, these are very warlike nations. I bet they weren't getting PTSD like we do. When their warriors came back from fighting the US military or fighting each other, I bet they pretty much just slipped right back into tribal life. And maybe what determines the rate of long-term PTSD isn't what happened out there, but the kind of society you come back to. And maybe if you come back to a close, cohesive, tribal society, you can get over trauma pretty quickly. And if you come back to an alienating modern society, you might remain traumatized your entire life. In other words, maybe the problem isn't them, the vets. Maybe the problem is us. Certainly, modern society is hard on the human psyche by every metric that we have. As wealth goes up in a society, the suicide rate goes up instead of down. If you live in modern society, you're up to 8 times more likely to suffer from depression in your lifetime than if you live in a poor agrarian society. Modern society has probably produced the highest rates of suicide and depression and anxiety and loneliness and child abuse ever in human history. I saw one study that compared women in Nigeria, one of the most chaotic and violent and corrupt and one of the poorest countries in Africa, to women in North America. And the highest rates of depression were urban women in North America. That was also the wealthiest group. So let's go back to the US military. 10% are in combat. Around 50% have filed for PTSD compensation. So about 40% of veterans really were not traumatized overseas, but have come home to discover that they are dangerously alienated and depressed. So what is happening with them? What's going on with those people? The phantom 40% that are troubled, but they don't understand why. Maybe it's this. Maybe they had an experience of sort of tribal closeness in their unit when they were overseas. They were eating together, sleeping together, doing tasks and missions together. They were trusting each other with their lives. And then they come home and they have to give all of that up, and they're coming back to a society, a modern society, which is hard on people who weren't even in the military. It's just hard on everybody. And we keep focusing on trauma, PTSD. But for a lot of these people, maybe it's not trauma. I mean, certainly soldiers are traumatized, and the ones who are have to be treated for that. But a lot of them, maybe what's bothering them is actually a kind of alienation. I mean, maybe we just have the wrong word for some of it. And just changing our language, our understanding would help a little bit. Post-deployment alienation disorder. Maybe even just calling it that for some of these people would allow them to stop trying to imagine a trauma that didn't really happen in order to explain a feeling that really is happening. And in fact, it's an extremely dangerous feeling. That alienation and depression can lead to suicide. These people are in danger. It's very important to understand why. The Israeli military has a PTSD rate of around 1%. The theory is that everyone in Israel is supposed to serve in the military. When soldiers come back from the front line, they're not going from a military environment to a civilian environment. They're coming back to a community where everyone understands about the military. Everyone's been in it or is going to be in it. Everyone understands the situation they're all in. It's as if they're all in one big tribe. We know that if you take a lab rat and traumatize it and put it in a cage by itself, you can maintain its trauma symptoms almost indefinitely. And if you take that same lab rat and put it in a cage with other rats, after a couple of weeks, it's pretty much okay. After 9/11, the murder rate in New York City went down by 40%. The suicide rate went down. The violent crime rate in New York went down after 9/11. Even combat veterans of previous wars who suffered from PTSD said that their symptoms went down after 9/11 happened. The reason is that if you traumatize an entire society, we don't fall apart and turn on one another. We come together, we unify. Basically, we tribalize. And that process of unifying feels so good and is so good for us that it even helps people who are struggling with mental health issues.